long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King newbie Matt Freeman, who will be headed to Las Vegas tomorrow to do some spying. And by spying, I mean getting wasted, losing all his money on blackjack, and getting kicked out of Planet Hollywood when he finds out Britney Spears is no longer performing there. Matt Freeman, how you doing today? Are you excited? Are you excited for your Vegas trip, Matt?
Britney's no longer at Planet Hollywood?
No, man. She got emancipated and said, fuck all that shit. I'm doing my own stuff. I don't think emancipated was the right word, but she's not under that stupid thing where she can't make any decisions for herself anymore.
Well, I'm happy for her, but what am I supposed to do?
I guess not go see her. Matt, have you ever been to Vegas, actually?
I've never been to Las Vegas.
You've never been to Las Vegas? Oh my God.
I don't know if I'm right to worry about this, but I have this worry that I would go and then I would be like Marge Simpson with the slot machines and I would lose all my money.
No, I don't think. I think you would enjoy blackjack. I don't think you'd like slot machines. Slot machines are boring. Like, the thing about slot machines is you never win. You never win anything. Like, statistically, you play long enough, you're going to lose. But literally, slot machines are like designed to where if you play for more than a few minutes, your amount will just go down, right?
Yes. So you win the jackpot.
No, Matt, that's not going to happen. But blackjack's fun because you can just play like minimum bets and get free drinks and just chat with the people around you and get drunk and play blackjack. It's fun. Vegas is fun, man. You should go to Vegas. We should go to Vegas.
We should do like a Boulder and then Vegas trip.
What would we do in Boulder?
Start a small community.
We start a small community and then we decide who has to leave it to go to Vegas for the weekend.
Yeah.
Sure, let's do it. Okay. We'll add that on top of our main trip.
Good.
We got so many trips coming up.
It's a deal.
This week on the show, The Stand continues with chapters 54 through 56. Folks, you got trouble right here in Boulder City as Harold Hawk Louder finally gets everything he wants, getting sweaty with both Nadine and sweaty with some dynamite. Meanwhile, our new permanent council sends their spies out to Vegas, and at least one of them will never be heard from again. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
I really enjoyed this. There's some really great dramatic moments. There's a lot of tension building up. You know, the pacing in the recent weeks has been slower, which didn't bother me. Like just honestly, like it did not bother me. It was just like, okay, yeah, we're doing something kind of more intellectual, and now we're getting back into like a tense. I'm worried about what's going to happen.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll just get right into it here, not waste any time, because I think that segues perfectly to the thing I wanted to say here as we begin chapter 54, which is this is week 3 of us in the zone, right? We entered the Boulder Free Zone almost a month ago, and we've spent the last 3 weeks and, 240 plus pages observing committee meetings, seeing these characters kind of deal with these things. And there's obviously been a lot of character growth and change and conflict along with this. But I think it's interesting that we haven't seen what Flag has been up to. We haven't seen what our antagonists or any of those characters in that half of the story have been up to for almost a month now. And I'm just curious if it's still working for you at all.
Yeah, I think the way I view this is that I've adjusted to it. Okay. And I was thinking about this in context of a different show a TV show that I was watching. And the problem with that show, I was like, it's not that this show is too slow paced. It's that we're alternating between a slow paced plot line and a fast paced dramatic plot line. And so like when you're alternating like that, your attention will drift when you go onto the slow plot line, and you'll be like, when are we going to get back to the fun stuff?
Are you subtweeting Rings of Power again, Matt?
I'm subtweeting Rings of Power. I am. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm generally enjoying the show. The Numenor plotline is very slow.
I agree.
But that doesn't happen here because the whole story has very intentionally slowed down altogether and sort of transformed into this different thing, and then you just adjust to it. You just accept it. I actually feel like if we had sort of done this thing where, not an uncommon thing in storytelling where you have one plot thread happening in Boulder, and then you switch over to a parallel plot thread in, you know, Vegas with something like really intense and crazy happening. Then every time you jump back to Boulder, you're going to be like, oh my God, you know, but that does,
Yeah.
again, that doesn't happen because you decisively slow down and spend time at this slower pace.
I like that. And I think you're absolutely right that was something that King was considering when he was, you know, lining out this section. One of the other things I think that's worth considering is this idea that we have these 3 spies that are about to be sent out. And I think I was it's not that I was surprised by your reaction when we first introduced this plot line that this is a terrible, stupid idea and I don't understand why we're doing it. It's not that surprised me necessarily. I just it's been so long since I read the book for the first time that I just take, oh, we're going to send some spies to Vegas as just a matter of fact, factual thing that's going to happen. And I don't really think about it beyond that, you know? And I think your reaction to it was a very normal, wait, why are we doing this? Wait, why are we sending these people? Wait, to do what? And I think perhaps one of the decisions to intentionally structure the book for the last 300 pages to avoid anything going on in Vegas is to maybe get the reader a little bit more on board with the sending of the spies thing, with the assumption that we don't get to see what's happening in Vegas until some of our spies get there or don't get there. We don't know. But maybe that's what we're holding on to, is that the next time we're going to see Vegas, it's going to be through the eyes of these spies that we're about to send. And so maybe that have the reader kind of be on board a little bit more, because I really want to know what's going on with Flag in Vegas. We got this really tantalizing hint of it in the Trash Can Man chapter, tantalizing and terrifying, and then we haven't seen it since. So I think that's maybe part of it, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I love that explanation, and you're totally right, because now I agree. I feel this sense of oh, I really want to find out what's happening in Vegas, and King has, as you say, intentionally denied us that. So no, that's I mean, I frankly don't think it's any better of an idea than I thought it was before, but I do feel like the urge, right? That
sure, yeah,
the sense that well, we need information.
Yeah, you maybe understand their frame of mind a little bit more than you would if you, as the magic book people, get to hop over there every other chapter and see what's going on with Flag and Lloyd and Trash Can Man and all that.
Yeah, honestly, it's just everybody almost died just making their way to Boulder, and many of those almost dying incidents involved brushing up against, you know, evil people, and it's okay, well, now you're going to go on a dangerous long distance cross country journey. Some of you not even in cars, and you're gonna be going toward the evil people. So I'm just yeah, I am. It's a rough sell for me, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it all plays out. We do know for a fact that one of those people is never seen by anyone in the zone again. So not necessarily that she dies,
right?
But we know she doesn't get back.
Yeah, and we don't get that same exact warning for the other two, which is
no, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So the first order of business as we open up on another committee meeting is they're talking about the spies and if they're going to actually send them. And they basically decide that, yes, they are. We talked about this a bit already, and I think we'll talk more about the spies as we watch them all depart one by one. So for now, we'll move on to the other item that the committee is talking about, and that is we need to have another big meeting, and we need to do some things at this big meeting, one of which is we need to have a census committee to start tracking how many people are living here in Boulder in the free zone, because so many people are coming and we can't keep track of it. And I love Larry's response to this because it's really interesting. He says, don't we have enough other things to worry about without hacking around with a bunch of diddly shit bureaucracy? Which, I mean, true, right? But I mean, I don't know. Interesting. Just what was your take on his kind of outburst, I guess we can call it here?
Well, it's fun. I mean, the way Larry says it is both funny and sort of understandably offensive to the likes of Glenn, because Glenn sees the implementation of at least some bureaucracy as actually being important to the establishment of functioning order. And to Larry, you know, bureaucracy is just a kind of pure stupid thing that's been injected into the world for no reason. But for somebody like Glenn, bureaucracy is just like a natural byproduct of institutions,
Uh-huh.
and they're trying to build institutions for the purposes of creating a society. Um, but then, on the flip side, to sort of defend Larry's point, it's like, but but is that our priority?
Mhm.
There's the implicit fault line here is some of these people want to build a society, and some of these people want to prepare for the battle with flag, and I think that is fundamentally the crisis that is being built up toward is like
Yeah.
what are we doing here?
Yeah, and to quote from another book that you and I talked about for several years, are we so anxious to rebuild society in the exact way that it was before that we're not actually taking time to learn any of the lessons
Mm,
that brought us to this point in the first place?
yes.
Because it seems like we're, the anxiety and the anxiousness to bring about society again, and a society that looks very, very familiar, is interesting, given what the book is saying about what America was, and all these things we've talked about over the course of the last few months.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a valid question. I think that Larry is asking, although he's asking it in kind of a dickish way, just to be
Yeah.
like what would happen if we didn't
Hmm.
do this?
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's really interesting. I like this sort of. It's not that him and Glenn are in conflict per se, but there's definitely some tension being generated.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of a larger kind of push and pull that I think goes through all of this week's reading, which is like, all these things, it makes sense to have. Like, it makes sense on a broad level to want to know how many people are living in your society. It makes sense to want to have law and order. It makes sense to want to have a person that can lock someone up when someone does something bad, and then another person who can, fairly, like, all these things formed in our society for a reason, right? They have value. They are solving a need that the community has. But we're like rushing into them so quickly, partially because Glenn has kind of, picked up this mantle and like driven it forward as quickly as possible, which is ironic considering he was that doom and gloom guy at the beginning. And he's also the one that's seemingly starting to be most affected by the supernaturalness of what Mother Abigail is.
Yeah, and I mean it's funny. I didn't think about this until we're having this conversation just now, but like human societies existed for thousands and thousands of years without any kind of census.
True.
And
Yeah.
and it's not like they're going to have millions and millions of people.
Hmm.
And if they, and even if they did, there's no reason why all those people would need to stay around Boulder. Like you can spread out, you can, you can support people in different ways. There's no need to have this like extremely centralized sort of New England town hall society, because that's just not the way the world looks anymore. So
Yeah.
so they really are bringing back specific institutions from like this century, or last century,
Yeah.
but like those institutions may not even be the appropriate ones for the context.
Sure. Well, and I mean, like, the value of a census in our government is we have a representational government that is,
Mm-hmm.
based at least partially on population sizes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it is valuable knowing how many people live where. In this government, at least as it exists currently, it is kind of true that it immediately goes to this idea of, oh, it'll help us know who has come and who has left, which brings you down this whole line of questioning that they're talking about when, like, oh, if we think someone's about to leave, shouldn't we just prevent them from doing that and locking them up?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of uncomfortable nature of the fact that the world has created this binary now that we know of, basically because of magic, because of the draw of these dreams. There's two societies now. There's the free zone and there's Vegas. And if you have a person that's seemingly not fitting in with the ones, oh well, then their only recourse is to go to the zeros. And shouldn't we prevent that?
Yeah.
And that starts to make the Boulder free zone feel a lot less free.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the census, I don't know if this is a true fact, but I would suspect that another purpose of a census is for like tax collection. So it's not just like,
Sure. Yeah.
oh, we want to represent you. It's also like we want to be able to put our thumb on you, which, I'm reminded of my favorite "Oh brother, where art thou" quote. I wing the census, man. Where the census is not necessarily on your side, right? And that's just
Hmm.
an example of like one institution where maybe don't bother doing that.
Yeah.
But to your point about how it's gonna interact with the fact that we've got people running off to flag. I'm going to sort of take a devil's advocate position, because I don't really think that I would stand by this position if I were on the Boulder Free Zone Council necessarily. But I was thinking about, like, going over to Flag isn't just like a statement about whether you enjoy the sunny Nevada desert more than you enjoy the cool mountain air of Boulder. It's literally like a statement that you're a bad guy and you're on the bad guy team and you're a villain and you're evil. Because that's how this world is set up. So, like, if somebody's like, I'm a bad guy, I'm gonna leave now, then are you kind of on some level entitled to lock them up?
That's interesting, because as you were talking, I really wanted to push back on you on that idea.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting that the two most clear examples of this we have are Nadine and Harold, who are people that have no delusions about who Randall Flagg is and about what leaving the free zone to go to Vegas would mean for the two of them, right? So I think you're right. I do think there might exist a person who just doesn't fit in here and thinks that it might be more fun over there, and is not necessarily, I am going to go do villain things. I just like, there's a lot of talk in this episode, and we're going to talk about this for a while, so I don't want to get too much to it yet, but about being on the outside versus being on the inside, right? And I think you could see a type of person who feels like an outsider, that necessarily doesn't want to be bad guy that does bad guy things, saying, maybe I'll try my hand at Vegas because it's not really working out for me here. I mean, we do learn that there's a character that has left, a character named Charlie Impening, who has left, who has disappeared, and their assumption is that he went to Vegas. So, was that a bad guy? Could be. We didn't spend a lot of time with him in the context of Free Zone. He was, all we really saw of him, Matt, was he was like one of the people like loudly outspoken against the type of government that they were trying to form. He was just like the negative Nancy guy who was like always, like nothing's gonna work here, blah 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 blah. He was, so it's not like he was like great guy that we lost, bummer. But yeah, I mean, I do think, at least through the examples that we have of Nadine and Harold, they have no delusions to what going to Vegas is. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, I probably am overstating it somewhat, because I think we haven't spent much time in Vegas narrative wise, but when we were there, it didn't seem like all those guys were orcs. Like they had their own backstories, they had their own reasons, they had their own tragic pasts. The main character, Lloyd, that we were following, he was not a monster, right? He was like he did some terrible things.
Yeah.
And then so it's more complicated than I was just making it out to be, which is kind of why I don't really fully endorse that idea. It's just, when you live in a world that actually has like real metaphysical evil and good, you can sort of with a straight face consider the idea of justifying locking up the bad guys.
Yeah, but I mean, preemptively locking up the bad guys, right? Like, I think it is interesting though, because we haven't gotten much of Vegas. You're right, but the parts that we have seen, I think, do paint a picture of a place very, very different from the Free Zone, or for now, right? Like, I mean, the idea that in Vegas they probably do have a census, right? Because they have work assignments. You get assigned a job and you go do that job. In Boulder, they have people working on committees and stuff like that, but it's mostly volunteer, right? If you want to be on the corpse burying committee, you volunteer to do that. If you want to be up at the power plant trying to help get the power on, you volunteer to do that. No one is being told they have to do a job in this place yet. But, you start to organize it more, eventually, maybe that's where you go. And interesting, again, the Free Zone was a cute name that Ralph came up with, not even really thinking about it, but it does represent like a goal for this place, right? I mean, they brought the Constitution back, they gung ho freedom, but I don't know. We'll see. They're here talking about if they should lock people up preemptively in case for the crime of not fitting in, and they're not fitting in. They might go to Flag. We better throw them in a jail cell, and that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like there could come to be a kind of irony to the name free zone,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, hey, this isn't the free zone. What are we doing?
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and is the threat of another danger out there enough to kind of make you abandon the principles that you believe in for security and safety,
Mm-hmm.
which is if you ask all the military people manufacturing the super virus, they probably would have given that same argument, right? It was like, well, we needed to do it because they were going to do it first. So in fact, I think they did make that exact argument, right? Like that's why they developed this virus, is like, we needed to do it first in case they did it, so we could do it to them first, and that's, we have this Flag and Abigail, dichotomy here now. And we have these people that are scared of that unknown out there that might at any minute drop a nuke on them or something. And so they're like, what do we need to do? What lines do we have to cross to make sure we're safe?
Yeah, it seems like the biggest theme of the story is, what would you be willing to do in the name of fighting evil, or what you perceive to be evil, which is always the rub, right?
Yeah.
If you actually know it to be evil, then it's like, well, that's one thing, but it's you definitely are not always right about that. And then
I mean, like you said, this is a world that exists in which there is a literal, tangible evil right over the horizon, which makes these decisions perhaps a little bit easier to make than in a real world situation. But maybe the point of that is so they can shine a light on how we tend to polarize everything.
Well, and how that thrust toward, like, we must be willing to sacrifice everything to defeat the evil is actually like the truly destructive impulse. I'm reminded of the whole thread throughout the entire Dark Tower and everything connected to it, really, where the evil is always a little bit disappointing in the end. The evil's it very often ends with a bit of a whimper compared to kind of what you expected. And it's like, maybe Flag is not nearly as dangerous as these people are dangerous to each other in their sort of thrashing attempts to combat the great evil. I don't know how that would look exactly in this story, but I can see a direction where Flag's not even like really all that important, and it's actually more about, like, are these people going to tear each other apart? I mean, we've already got Harold kind of planning to do that. So I don't know. We'll see how things fall out.
We will see. So I think this whole conversation goes back to Nick's Law and Order thing he was thinking about in last week's reading, and he kind of presents that here in this committee and says that he thinks we should establish a committee for law and order, and that Stu should be put in charge of that department. He'll be the sheriff of the town. Something that Stu is like immediately like, absolutely not. And Franny even more is like, absolutely not. I really like this as just an idea, though, because one of the things they talk about here is like, no one's done anything bad yet, and we won't do anything bad. We don't think anyone's going to do anything bad, which is ironic to say in a reading that has Harold putting together a bomb. But there's still people out there doing things. There's a guy who gets really wasted and goes out and starts destroying property. And we talked a couple weeks ago about what is a big deal if you smash a window, right? Well, here's a guy going down the street smashing all the windows and leaving glass everywhere. And it's like, what do we do with this person? We don't have the authority to lock him up, I guess. I mean, we have the authority of, like, most people want that to happen, but like, what do we do? What does it look like? And I think there's just this general idea that as a society, oh, well, we all like, we get along. We don't need to do this, do we? And it's like, well, maybe we do. I don't know. What do you think about this? Like, again, this goes back to their desire to build a society. And it's kind of like we're watching and fast forward the building of a society, and people going, oh, we really need to be able to lock someone up when they're being destructive.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to use the same lens I did a minute ago, which is interestingly something I didn't really think about until just now, which is like, well, for thousands and thousands of years, we had societies that had norms that were basically laws, and when you broke a norm, you were punished, or you were ostracized, you were exiled. Maybe you were killed, depends, right? And it depends on a lot of things, but that was always one of the functions of having a society and authority, and just a basic part of a functioning society, right? So you have to have some sort of norms and norm enforcement. That doesn't necessarily have to be a sheriff with a 6-shooter, but but that doesn't seem like too bad of a solution either.
Sure. Well, I mean, it is interesting though, because the other thing that they've done is they've codified the Constitution now, and so therefore the citizens of this place have rights that it is their responsibility for upholding, right? And so the idea that you can't actually, we're not allowed to just throw a person in prison without charging them with something. We ratified this thing that said you have to get a fair trial. Oops, we have the responsibility to do all this other stuff now. And like the idea that we ratified the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence as more of a symbolic gesture to like get everyone on board with this, the idea that we are going to build a society that resembles the society that we used to have. That's great, but also now we have responsibilities and like limits and all these things that I don't think they fully considered. And like, I think for now, with the amount of people they have, yeah, it's fine. Like if you throw a drunk in prison, and like that's the type of stuff you're dealing with, and no one's going to be crying out against rights violations. But the more people come, and the more opportunities for crime and other things there are, the bigger the problem this becomes.
It's really, it actually kind of makes you appreciate the miracle that is rule of law and the presumption of innocence and all of these things that we at this point in history just take for granted, which were absolutely not the norm for most of our species. There's usually some guy who was in charge, and the reason he was in charge is basically that he had the loyalty of the other strong guys who would kick your ass if you stepped out of line. And there was definitely none of those things. So just sort of reinstituting America in microcosm is really making you consider a lot of these things that apply to you every day, but you just never think about them.
Yeah, and like the reason why these things existed in the first place, right? I think it's really interesting. It's also interesting that the presumption of innocence is one of those things that like you read, this is not guaranteed by the Constitution, and you're like, no, yes it is, and then you read and you're like, oh wait, no, it's actually not. Now state Supreme Courts have upheld that it is like the basic assumption of what a fair trial is has to include a presumption of innocence, but that's not actually guaranteed in the Constitution at all.
I didn't know that. I mean, yeah, I guess I knew that like our legal system inherits from the English legal system, so maybe that was always just a thing that they agreed they were going to do. But no, I had no idea that was not really part of the federal government.
Nope, not in the Constitution at all. Yeah, I think you're right that like when they wrote the right to a fair trial, like that was the presumption of innocence was assumed as part of that, just because of statutory, like just like the system as a whole. But yeah, not specifically guaranteed.
Okay, fascinating.
Fun times. So I mean, like this is complicated, and I think this is supposed to be complicated because this is like how to build a society, if you want to build a society that looks similar to another society, and what problems could and will arise from those things.
Yeah, it's really like I said, it is really interesting, actually, like intellectually stimulating.
I really like this quote here from Franny as she's thinking to herself as she falls asleep. She lay awake long into the night, thinking that warmth can only come from a burning. Prometheus got his eyes pecked out in that one, and that love always comes due in blood. And a queer certainty stole over her, as numbing as some creeping anesthesia, that they would finish by wading in blood. The thought made her place her hands protectively over her belly, and she found herself thinking for the first time in weeks of her dream, the dark man with his grin and his twisted coat hanger. So I love this idea that warmth can only come from a burning, so warmth being, the safety, protection, society, right? That like in creating these things, we inherently must destroy other things. And
Yeah.
how that for Franny, that's reflected in the fact that Stu is now going to be in charge of law in this place, which puts him in the crosshairs, him in trouble, him in danger, and this kind of growing unease that Franny has, that none of this is going to work out for her in the way she wants it to.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I like the poetic nature of it. I do wonder, like, love always comes due in blood. I'm like, is that true? Does it?
I don't. It's interesting because I think the first half of that is something I fully agree with. That, like, warmth comes from a burning is just factually true in just how energy works, right? I guess not literally a burning, but you got me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, I think it more reflects her pessimistic nature of this thing, which I think is fed by Flag and the specific dreams that he was feeding her, which all center around her baby. And this is kind of the start of a thread that will continue through all these chapters as we see Franny kind of increasingly worried about the state of her child.
Yeah. And basically, it's a poetic statement about the necessity of sacrifice for anything worthwhile.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could argue that love always comes due in blood, and that, like, we're not immortal, right? That like any person you love will eventually die. Like, that's just going to happen. And so, like, that eventually it will end, and it will end, maybe not always terribly, but it will end.
Yeah. No, I think that's the closest thing to what is meant by that. Yes, I agree.
So from here, we cut over to Harold Lauder, who has volunteered to be part of that burial committee we talked about earlier that is responsible for going around all of the boulder and cleaning up all the corpses. I think it's interesting to me that Harold specifically says he's doing this to become one of the best liked and most trusted of the community, right? Because he notes here that the way to win over a community is by doing the dirty jobs that no one else wants to do. And the question I have to ask once again is, to what end? Why is he wanting to win over the community? Because, I mean, we know by the end of this week's reading that Harold is going to be doing something explosive, and perhaps you could argue that his in with the community will give him an opportunity to do that he wouldn't have had otherwise. But he didn't have that plan right at this moment, right? Like, that plan seems to be kind of brought on by Nadine coming into his life. Like, before Nadine, all Harold really wanted to do, his grand plan, was to shoot Stu and then leave, and that was it. And so I guess the question I'm asking you, Matt, why is Harold trying to win over the community so badly?
Yeah, so there's kind of like two layers to it. I think on one layer, he tells himself this anyway, that he wants to make a point. He wants to show them, like, you stupid idiots, I'm so much smarter and better than you that I could make you all love me, even though I hate all of you, and I'm just superior to you. You're inferior to me, and then in the end you're going to find out how much I hated you, and then you'll realize how inferior and awful you all are, which is just sort of nonsense, right? It's sort of bullshit in the same way that a lot of Harold's thinking has been, but I can totally see that being sort of story he tells himself, where he's like, this is a way to stick it to them, like it's like the whole Count of Monte Cristo making friends with what's his face before he betrays him, instead of just like having him killed, yeah, I get it. But then actually on like the lower level, I actually kind of feel like Harold is just a human and wants to fit in and wants to be accepted and wants to be liked, and so he's just doing, and that's actually the more deeper underlying reason why he's doing this stuff. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And that's actually what I love so much about this section this week here, is because Harold gets in with this burial squad and they do like him. They really like him. He gets a nickname. They call him Hawk, which is objectively the coolest nickname ever, right? I mean, I don't think it gets any cooler than that. Right. And what is Harold's reaction to this? Harold's grin was startled and defensive. Hawk? What kind of joke was that? A bad one, of course. Cheap sarcasm, calling fat, pimply Harold Lauder Hawk. He felt the old black hate rise, directed at Wysiak this time, and then it subsided in sudden confusion. He wasn't fat anymore. He couldn't even properly be called stout. His pimples had vanished over the last 7 weeks. Wysiak didn't know that. No, he had once been a school joke.
Why Zach didn't know that Harold's father had once asked him if he was a homosexual. Why Zach didn't know that Harold had been his popular sister's cross to bear. And if he had known, why Zach probably wouldn't have given a sweet shit. And like this is the heartbreaking moment, right? Because he's so fucking close, right? Mm-hmm. He's so close to realizing that he's acting like a stupid, insane person, and just putting aside the hate, putting aside the bitterness, putting all these things aside, and realizing, Harold, when people like you, they like being around you now. You have kind of put aside, in your effort to be more liked, you've kind of inadvertently put aside the personality traits of yourself that people find grating, and people like you now. And the tragedy of this whole fucking thing is that this is the exact moment that Nadine strolls into his life, offering herself up to him. And it's like, you immediately go, oh, what would have happened if Nadine hadn't walked into this house at this moment, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the startling and unexpected genius of this twist of the story, because I really didn't think this was coming. I thought we were just going to straightforwardly follow Harold deeper and deeper down the spiral until his end. But you know, yeah, like you said, we actually see him begin to notice all the stuff that we've been talking about over the past few weeks. He had his head up his ass, but he manages to pull his head up his ass, out of his ass,
yeah,
just long enough to be like, what? Wait a second, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And like just in time, and I would say, like, it's not even. I would state it even more strongly, like, it's not like he almost realizes. Like, I think he does realize, but then the temptation that Nadine provides is just so intoxicating that he sacrifices it. He just gives it away because he's like, oh my God, I this is what I've always wanted, you know?
Yeah. And this is why I love this, because it's like this perfect distillation of the concept of want versus need in a character, right? Because I think what Harold is getting through the men in this committee, the burial committee, and through these people that he's, you know, kind of endearing himself to, is exactly what he needs as a human being, what he needs as a character. And then Nadine walks in the door and gives him what he thinks he wants. What he thinks he wants is a woman to love him, is a woman to not, maybe not even love him, just sleep with him, just fuck him, and just do all these things and make him feel wanted and needed in a very physical, extremely sexual kind of way. And these are the things he thinks he needs, and he's wrong. And what he needs is what these other people are offering him. And you're right that Harold's tragic flaw is that he can't see past that. He can't see past it, at least not in the moment, and he succumbs to it. And I one thing I want to make clear here, and I don't know if we did a good enough job of this in the weeks past, because we've been very, very hard on Harold these past few weeks, completely fairly, by the way. But I just want to say that I love him as a character. I really do. I think he's fantastic. I love reading about him. I love talking about him. He is frustrating and disgusting and awful. And you know, to be entirely honest, also has some parts of him that remind me of who I was when I was a teenager, right? I mean, not anything that crosses the line, don't worry folks, but like there are parts of the nerdy, overweight, pimply kid that is Harold that I was like, oh, I was kind of like that when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. Yeah. And I kind of thought that like getting a girlfriend would solve every single one of my problems, because I would finally feel, you know, wanted, and like I that was the solution to everything. And I was not bitter and angry to the level of Harold, but like frustrated with the fact that I wasn't able to have that happen. Like these are all things that I went through as a teenager. So like I relate to a lot of Harold, and I think Harold is just that person taken to, you know, 11 for a story. But I love Harold. I really do. I think he's fantastic to read about.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think every you know 15 to 18-year-old, especially men, is sort of like a pitiable creature in a variety of ways. And it's very, it is relatable, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're this storm of uncertainty and self-doubt, and really I think a degree of self-loathing is pretty common
Yeah.
amongst young people. And really that's always been Harold's problem. Is it's not that other people don't like him, it's that he hates himself.
Mm-hmm.
And it has taken until, these people have accepted him and shown him warmth and belonging for him to even begin to consider that he might be someone worthy of being liked, and thus begin to like himself.
Yeah.
But before that can happen, Nadine jumps on it.
Yeah. Well, and I think importantly, like the reason why people are responding to him and liking to him and inviting him is he's putting forward an effort, like I remember like being frustrated at being a teenager in high school who didn't have a girlfriend. And then if I like looked at myself honestly, I was like, what were you doing to like get a girlfriend, Scott?
Right.
Oh, I was just standing in the hallway waiting for girls to come tell me they liked me.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why that didn't work. And that's like the same thing with Harold. It's like, you got to put forth an effort. You got to put forth an effort with people if you want people to like you. Like, that's just how it works, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that I think everyone has to learn eventually. And some people are much naturally better at doing it, and some people it's more difficult. And Harold is the type of person that it's more difficult, and he has to try, and he's trying with this bitter resentment. And even so, even like trying through proving a point or trying to show how stupid these people are and how artificial, like it works, man.
Yeah.
It just works.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. Like, and there's so much to talk about here, so I don't want to do it all up front here, but I just want to say, like, I was floored by, I love this turn. I mean, it's heartbreaking, obviously, but I just like from a narrative perspective, I was like, yes, I love the king is doing this. This is so good.
Yeah, because you can sort of feel him through sort of the way the POV is written. You feel him kind of wake up, and just like that section you just read, where it's like he's looking around in confusion as if he has just come to his senses, and he's like, "Wait a minute, these are my friends now."
Yeah.
Like, and which again, as we've said, makes it all the more tragic when it stops.
Yeah. And I love how he's got this voice inside of his head that's saying like, no, these people are these these are Neanderthals, and so you can't listen to their opinion. If you couldn't listen to their opinion when they thought bad of you, you certainly can't listen to their opinion when they think good of you. And then he's like, wait a minute, that's crazy what I just said there.
Yeah.
That's an insane thing to think. And you're just like, oh yes, look, he's letting himself feel these things and learn these things, and you're like, yes. And then and then the unfortunate thing is Nadine walks right into that and just fucks it all up. And not to say it's all Nadine's fault. Obviously Harold is the one that makes the key choice here, right? Like it's Harold's fault, but it's like, he was so close.
Yeah, it's Harold's choice, and it's Harold's mistake, but Nadine's the one who is like willingly being the weapon in a way that I just find, it's not tragic. She's just being a tool of evil,
Yeah.
Not even like for anything. I guess we don't really fully understand Nadine yet. I don't know if we ever will, honestly, but
sure. So I mean, we had to talk about this Nadine and Harold relationship. I think I think the thing I want to say at the top here before we talk about like how much we love the writing of all this is that the book is pretty clear here that this is bad, that everything happening here is a bad thing. And I think the book is pretty unequivocal about this. Like last week we had this wonderfully complex situation where Nadine being rejected by Larry was like good for him, but bad for her. But this is just bad for everyone. And even though it's written from the perspective of Harold, who is getting a lot of sexual excitement out of this whole thing, I don't think this is meant to be seen to me as like titillating in any way, right? Like this is like this is a thing that's happening at the request of the literal devil. It's bad. It's bad, right?
Yeah, I found it surprisingly not titillating, despite the fact that it's sort of objectively graphic. Like the way. So I found the whole like seduction scene to be just absolutely fascinating. I don't know, maybe one of my favorite things in the book from a writing perspective, because you've got it's it's like if it were written differently and if these were different characters, it could be like a healthy scene of a man and a woman. The woman's really into the guy. She lays it on thick. She seduces him. Good for you, you kids. Go for it, right? But it's written in this way where Harold is like, what the hell is going on? Why is she being like this?
Yeah.
And then she's like being really like, forward, and then he takes the huge like, risk of being kind of engaging in double entendre, and then it like works, and he's like, what the fuck? And then he realizes it's like, oh, it's because Satan told her to.
Yeah.
And it's this huge like pall over the whole thing, because he's like, well, I'm gonna get what I wanted, but this is not really how I wanted this to happen. But I guess this is what I deserve. And it's just, like, it was such a mind-blowingly like vivid and dark journey, and just really a pretty short piece of writing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that works about it to me is you can understand on a like an intellectual level, like I would get why Harold would be extremely turned on by this whole situation. Mm-hmm. Like I get it. But it's not like the type of thing where you read it and you're like, oh yeah, right, I'm on board for this. It just feels weird and wrong. And the way he writes it, like, I think it's so fascinating that we're in Harold's point of view throughout most of this, but like we as adults can be like, oh, she's actually like just doing like what a teenager would think is seduction, or like, this is why I love this. I love this quote here. I'm going to read it, then we can talk about it. When love, or a reasonable facsimile, had finally found him, it was as if he had slipped sideways into the pages of a love story in a glossy women's magazine. The authors of such stories, he had once claimed in an unacknowledged letter to Redbook, were one of the few convincing arguments in favor of enforced eugenics. So what he's saying is literally that the love story that he has turned into a porno love story, which we all know are bullshit, right? Like that is not how any of this, like porn in general is not how any of the stuff ever works, but it is how a porn crazed teenager would think this stuff works. So it's all bullshit, and we know that immediately. It's none of it's real, and the tragedy is that it doesn't seem to matter to Harold at all. But let's just pick at this quote here again, because Harold is the biggest fucking loser nerd in the world. He wrote into a porno mag saying that the authors writing the love stories, the sex stories, were not good writers.
My favorite word in the whole thing, just genius, is unacknowledged letter. Which just to me immediately summoned like a little vignette in my mind of like an editor sitting at their desk with, opening the letter with the letter opener and reading it and being like, what the fuck? hey Bob, get a load of this weirdo. It's so good.
And it to me states the fact that Harold was expecting acknowledgement for the letter, that like he maybe came home from school every day for a month and was like, Mom, did I get a letter in the mail from Redbook? Or like look at the letters to the editor section at the front of it or whatever. I don't know if they have those, but if they do, and just like, oh, someone responded to, like, come on, man. Did you think like someone's gonna respond to you? Like this is all part of Harold's delusion about how he is just better than everyone else when he's writing into fucking porno mag telling them they need to do a better job at their story writing. It's just fucking absurd and hilarious. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's just like, this is porn, and Harold is getting to live out porn, and great, that's good for you, I guess. It's not real at all.
Yeah, well, and he knows that. Like that's what's interesting is he totally knows this is not love. There's no meaning here. This is not a romance. This is a perfect facsimile of a of not a perfect facsimile. This is a superficial facsimile, like he says, of a love, of the appearance of a love story. It's funny. I even remember this is there were a lot of people. When I was a teenager, I remember there were couples who were clearly like acting the tropes of a romance novel without really understanding or feeling the things that were supposed to be behind that, and this is basically what's happening to Harold here.
Yeah, 100%. Like, man, it's so wild to me that Harold is a guy who's like absolutely convinced at all times that everyone else around him is making fun of him, hates him, doesn't want to hang out with him, all these things, right? Like, and it's really interesting to me that the only time we've actually seen someone be just like outright mean to Harold in the course of the story is Franny, and only that was in her diary, right? And so he wouldn't have actually known about any of that had he not read the diary. Everyone else is just kind of like, I don't know if I like this guy, but like, whatever. I'm not going to do anything about it. Like, no one is ever like outright mean to Harold, but he's convinced that everyone is at all times being mean to him. And then he gets with the one person that he knows for a fact is just putting on a front. Like, he's so convinced everyone else around him is putting on a front, but the one person he chooses to be with is the only one that is definitely, absolutely doing that with him.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, it's hilarious. Like, remember when Larry came by and was like, I've thought you're basically my hero. I just want to hang out. And they hung out. And then he's like, fuck that Larry guy. I hate him. It's like, what is your, anyway.
Yeah. So we learn that Nadine knows exactly what is on Harold's ledger because Flagg has told her all about it, and therefore she can like target specifically everything and anything he wanted. Which again, porn. It's just porn. And we see here that she offers him a choice, basically get everything except for that one little thing. Not allowed to actually do sex or vaginal sex, I think we should say. In exchange, all you have to do is sell your soul. In exchange, just kill a lot of people. And the chapter ends with, and Harold Lauder succumbed to his destiny, which is just sad. It's just sad.
Yeah, right. Really nails in the tragedy of it all, especially to call it destiny. Like, he almost made it.
Well, actually, sorry, go ahead. I want to talk to you about that word destiny because it's an interesting choice, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I wanted to just talk about the idea of, I think this is talking about the idea of destiny, what I wanted to say, because it's asking us to think about the idea of personal responsibility. And the thing is, this kind of gets back to what I was saying a minute ago about the idea that there's like explicit evil and explicit magic in the story. The idea of personal responsibility does seem to mean a little bit less in a story where you've got a magical, evil, telepathic man who knows your secrets and weaknesses, and is capable of sending a human being at you like a guided missile to take advantage of those weaknesses. It doesn't absolve Harold of his choices, certainly, but it's hard for me to hold him to quite the same level of culpability when we know that Flagg is basically magically pulling his strings. It reminds me of other stories we've read where there was like a precognitive involved, and the precognitive could just like play people like a fiddle because they just knew what you would do. And those stories also asked us very often to examine the idea of who's really responsible here. I don't know how far to push this exactly, but it did. I guess it made me feel a little bit more like this is a tragedy. Harold's a victim here, without fully absolving him of his crimes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I guess you're absolutely right that like it becomes a lot easier or a lot more difficult to change when you have a person like Randall Flagg, appearing and sending Nadine at you specifically to get into your weaknesses. Certainly true. I wonder, and we'll talk about this a bit later, like how much evil in this book is actually just abdicating personal responsibility, because we see it again and again and again. And the thing that I love about this particular quote, Harold succumbed to his destiny, is we could look at that from the narrator just declaring that, making a blanket statement of this was Harold's destiny, this is always where he was going, and this is always the way it was going to end. Or we could look at it as very close third person, that Harold is absolving himself because this was always the way it was going to end, and this is his destiny. And so he's kind of, through this very close third person, pushing responsibility away from him a little bit, because this was my destiny. This is the way it was going to happen. And so what choice do I actually have? And this is, I mean, the same thing we talked about Nadine last week, with this idea that, like, you know, when all choices are removed from me, I will pick the only choice I have left. And it's like, well, Nadine, no choices were actually removed. Just one choice was removed from you when Larry said no. You still had 100 other choices that you could have made. But no, this is my destiny. And so, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong that this, in this kind of world, this kind of, you know, magic induced world, that, like, it's a lot harder to make those choices, but we have characters doing it. I mean, I think Larry is the perfect example of that. Like, Larry was not being left alone by the Dark Man, but he still managed to make the correct choice anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider that maybe the Dark Man had a plan for Larry. Maybe Harold is the backup plan. You know, maybe
could be.
Maybe Nadine was literally supposed to seduce Larry.
Yeah,
you know, and you know, that would have caused Larry to sort of be pulled in a direction, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty shitty for Nadine, right? This idea that, like, the act that she thinks is dodging her fate would actually be sealing it in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I don't know if I really think that or not, but it's interesting to consider that Larry does seem to be a guy who the universe tried to pull him into his destiny, and he said no. So no, I really like this idea that, like, you know, I guess you could say upstream of the idea that the Dark Man is hounding you is the idea of, like, are you the kind of person who's going to wash your hands of the consequences of your actions or not? And if you're not the kind of person who would do that, then the Dark Man can't use you.
Sure. Yeah.
That's interesting to think about. I like that.
All right. Yeah. And I think that kind of relates to where we go next, because we begin our next chapter 55, with Larry chatting with the judge. And we immediately know what he's chatting with him about. And so does the judge. He kind of worked out for himself what Larry was about to ask him, and just immediately agrees to go be a spy for him. I love, Matt, that the judge sees himself as a rational man, there's that word again, who hasn't really bought into all the Mother Abigail mumbo jumbo, but he can't help but wonder, you know, when, you know, like, we're seeing this from a lot of the more rational characters, like, what do you do when the reality of this magic stuff is put in front of you? And I think what the judge does is agrees to go be a spy.
Yeah, it's funny because I would have placed him more on the you know, sort of religious person axis, because when we first see him, he's reading his Bible. But no, apparently he sees himself as being a lot more rational. I do wonder where we're going to go with this character.
Yeah. But then we have this quote I really want to talk to you about for a while. "Then live with it," the judge said with great relish. "For God's sake, Larry, grow up. Develop a little self-righteousness. A lot of that is an ugly thing, God knows, but a little applied all over your scruples is an absolute necessity. It is to the soul what a good sunblock is to the skin during the heat of summer. You can only captain your own soul, and from time to time some smart-ass psychologist will question your ability to even do that. Grow up." Wow, what a statement. I develop a little self-righteousness. Like, I think I pretty much only ever seen the phrase self-righteousness referred to in a negative context, right? Like, if you are calling someone self-righteous, you are meaning that negatively. That is a bad trait, that you should not have that trait. But it's fascinating that this little turn of phrase here shows maybe a little bit of it is good. Maybe Larry's problem right now is that he's so convinced of his own shittiness that he can't allow himself to think he's right about anything. And you need to have a little bit of that. Not like he says, too much is an ugly thing, but a little bit, you need a little bit of that. I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah. Well, it harkens back to what he was saying before, where he described Larry as the kind of guy who would be a partisan but never a zealot, or something along those lines. And it's like, yeah, you have to actually know your own mind, and you have to be willing to act on behalf of what you believe. Not, you know, too much, not to the extent that you're trotting over people and not considering other points of view, but also not pathologically worrying about, like, oh, but did I make the right choice? Oh, am I doing the right thing? To the point where, okay, well, at a certain point, that just becomes, that level of self-doubt is actually self-undermining, and you're not even doing the right thing that you know you should do because you're just so uncertain about it. I love it, man. Like I needed to have this speech. I know a lot of people in my life who need to have this speech. I'm gonna start telling people, hey man, develop some self-righteousness. It's because
Yeah.
I mean it's sort of, you know, it's similar to telling somebody to grow a spine, but it's a
Yeah.
little bit more kind of specific and pointed.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the same thing as having self. Like, I love that, because he could have just said have a little bit more self confidence, but that's
Mhm.
not what it is, right? It's not just confidence in it. There needs to be some things that you need to believe that you're right about, especially when you're in a position of leadership, right? Sometimes you have to make a decision, and you have to make the decision and be okay with letting yourself believe that it was the right decision.
Mhm.
Because if you're so wrapped up in, oh, was that the right decision, was it the wrong like, you're never going to actually choose. You're never going to
Yeah.
actually do anything.
You know, I mean, when you think of like the sort of straightforward heroic archetype, like your Aragorn or your Captain America, they definitely have a healthy dose of self-righteousness, right? Like
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they know what the right thing to do is, and they're gonna do that. And you know, usually with that archetype, it doesn't go too far, but they're a good example of like the right amount of it, I think, in a
Yeah.
fictional form anyway.
Yeah. I just love that I love it. Because, yeah, again, if I called someone self-righteous, you would immediately say, oh, that's bad. And I'm not saying that it's not, but
Mhm.
maybe it's a little bit more complicated than that,
Yeah.
because, like, we call righteousness good, right? Like,
Right.
righteousness is a positive quality. Self-righteousness, oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's a good choice because it forces you to second guess something that you always just assumed was bad, and it's like, well, there's a middle ground.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah.
And thus we say goodbye to the judge, who heads off the next morning. I love the section with the judge kind of going off. This passage in particular I wanted to call attention to. Judge Ferris drove on, glad to be making his start. He had slept poorly last night. He would sleep better tonight under the stars, his old body wrapped firmly in 2 sleeping bags. He wondered if he would ever see Boulder again, and thought the chances were probably against it. And yet his excitement was very great. It was one of the finest days of his life. That's pretty fascinating, right?
Yeah. I love how that's written. You know, I think I think part of the story is about taking on responsibility and being willing to sacrifice for something greater than yourself. And so
Yeah.
it makes sense that this character who is being depicted as very wise, is willing to do this dangerous thing, and not only willing, but he's like psyched. He's like,
Yeah.
he's basically like, I may be going to my death. It's gonna be great.
It gives his life meaning. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it shows the righteousness of Larry, right? Like, that he picked this guy. Like, this was Larry's handpicked person, and he picked correctly. Good choice, Larry. You made a good, you chose Lucy over Nadine. Good choice. You chose to send the judge. This is the perfect person to pick, because look at it. He wants this. He feels fulfilled. This is the best, the finest day of his life. So good for you, Larry, and good for the judge. Hopefully everything works out for Judge Ferris. He's going to be totally fine.
I hope that at least if he is going to die, I hope it's like honorable, you know, like,
Sure.
like something where it was a worthy sacrifice.
Sure.
But yeah, I hope I agree. I hope he's fine. Yes.
So from here, we cut over to Tom, and it's a scene that I hate it. I mean, it's fantastically written, but it makes me uncomfortable and angry, which is exactly what I think it's supposed to do. But man, I just hate it.
This is just a week for tragedy and disappointment and sadness, isn't it?
It really is. So we see here that Tom has moved into this house, and he's made himself comfortable in his new home, and decorated it as only Tom could. I love the detail of putting the credit card posters up on his wall mat, because remember, he can't read, right? But yet he looks at these posters and somehow knows that these 3 relate to each other in some way. And I think that's kind of another hint that there's more going on with Tom than people are giving him credit for.
Yeah, that which is sort of a prelude to what's going to happen in the chapter.
So because they hypnotize Tom, and well, something happens. He knows things that nobody else knows, and that he shouldn't know either. They ask him about Randall Flagg, and he talks about him, and he says he looks like anybody you see on the street, but when he grins, birds fall dead off telephone lines. When he looks at you a certain way, your prostate goes bad and your urine burns. The grass yellows up and dies where he spits. He's always outside. He came out of time. He doesn't know himself. He has the name of 1,000 demons. Jesus knocked him into a herd of pigs once. His name is Legion. He's afraid of us. We're inside. He knows magic. He can call wolves and live in the crows. He's the king of nowhere, but he's afraid of us. He's afraid of inside. So there's a lot there, Matt. I mean, it's wonderful. But a particular note to me is this outside inside language, which I wanted to bring up here specifically because I think it echoes in something Harold says here in a little bit. But this idea of, there's outside and there's inside, and he's perpetually outside, and what he's afraid of is inside. And so this is society, right? Like, we talk about society, we talk about civilization, we talk about groups inside in the warm, outside in the cold. These are two diametrically opposed things, and he is afraid of one of them.
And all the things that come along with it. You're accepted, you're part of a group, you're loved, you have belonging. And he doesn't understand that. He's afraid of it. He's perpetually alienated. He's a creature of the darkness. It's kind of a fey feeling, actually, which I don't normally associate with Flagg, actually.
I love the he doesn't know himself line as well. I think that's really fascinating. And it begs the question once again, is this Randall Flagg the same person that we've seen in the Dark Tower, in Eyes of the Dragon? Like, is this the same exact person or not? And I still don't think we're exactly clear on that, but
it's interesting. It says he came out of time, which is the most Dark Tower like direct sentence that we've seen, because it's like, that makes sense, because we know that his relationship with time, or that the greater Randall Flagg gestalt has an odd relationship with time. I feel like I'm beginning to feel like Randall Flagg as an entity is just sort of he's a man, but he's also a creature that is used by the forces of evil for various purposes in various ways, and it is just inconsistent, and it's self-consciously, intentionally inconsistent. That's my feeling anyway.
Sure.
Like that, I don't think this guy and the guy in Eyes of the Dragon are the same guy, or remember each other, or any of that. That's my opinion. But I think that's the fun part. Everybody has different opinions. I'm sure everybody who reads these books comes away with a different opinion.
Sure. So. And I think that's something that we probably be valuable to revisit a few more times before this book is done.
Yeah.
The other thing Tom says is, "I am God's Tom." When they ask him, who he is, and he's, "I'm not Tom, I'm God's Tom." What was that takeaway for you?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, this is the most direct incidence of a person with a mental disability in a Stephen King book, like being literally used as a sort of walkie-talkie to the white, where he's like, this is the ascended version of me that lives inside of my head and has a direct line to the cosmic forces of the universe, right? And you get the sense that God's Tom is kind of always in there, inaccessible. Reminds me of like the super old guy in Insomnia, where he seemed to sort of have dementia most of the time, and then he would like slip into this mode of being like, all right, this is like the way the greater forces of the universe work, but then it couldn't last long, right? Anyway, it's a very direct sort of implementation of this Stephen King trope.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I like that a lot. So God's Tom also tells us about Mother Abigail, and we learn that she is still alive, and she's still out in the wilderness. She's not quite right with God yet, is what we're told. And Tom also says she's to be pitied. She will see, but she will see too late. There will be death, his death. She will die on the wrong side of the river. And then that unfortunately gets cut off.
Yeah, which it's funny because they cut her off because it's like they can't stand to hear these sad things, but but rationally you're like, no, like this is super important information. Damn it. Yeah, it is really enticing for us as the reader. It's hard to infer much from it. I mean, other than just sort of like, okay, Abigail's gonna return, but she's gonna return too late to stop whatever disaster is coming, and then ultimately she will die before she can reap the fruits of whatever victory our heroes manage to earn by the end of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
That's my take from that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, we will see. It's definitely meant to kind of, intrigue you for sure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, man, the parts where like they have to instruct Tom here about like give him the story about why he's going to Vegas because they drove him out because he's mentally disabled and they didn't want him procreating and spread, like it's just heartbreaking, man. Like to put this to literally internalize this inside this man, and like you just remember in the back of your head the line of like, well, what if he just grows to legitimately believe the things that, and it's just like, it's just so sad, man. It just breaks. I hate it.
Yeah, that's I mean, it's funny. I wonder how much of my resistance to the idea of sending Tom at the beginning of when this was first mentioned as an idea was because I was like, this is just like the meanest thing you can imagine. Like, it's one thing to send somebody like the judge who is going under his own recognizance and understands the risks. Tom doesn't understand the risks. Tom doesn't have the wherewithal to like figure it out if there's a roadblock or any obstacle. He's totally open to being manipulated. The man, the man in black is likely to just like see right through him anyway. So yeah, just overall, I'm just my objections are like half practicality, but half like, you're gonna do this to my poor Tom?
Yeah.
Why? This is so sad. Yeah.
It is so sad, and they do it anyway, right? Like, despite everything that just happened in this moment, despite all of this, they go through with it anyway. And what I love about it is like we have our characters that we like, and we're kind of unsure if they're doing a good thing here. And I love how the characters themselves reflect that, right? Like Stu is uncertain about this. Nick, this is breaking his heart, right? And I love that like Nick, or Stu in particular, notices the darkness behind his eyes when they ask him to go. Like Tom just responds instantly. It's like, sure, I'll go west. Yeah, whatever you want, I'll do it because that's who I am. But like, there's a part of him that knows and understands, and I love this part as well so much. When I said he should kill any one person that got in his way, a kind of frown came over his face. It was gone right away. I don't even know if Ralph or Nick saw it, but I did. It was like he was thinking, okay, I understand what you mean, but I'll make up my own mind on that when the time comes. I love that too, because again, this underlying thing of like, we've a lot of people write Tom off as this he's mentally disabled, but there's stuff going on under the surface with him. A lot of really complicated stuff.
Yeah, and this feels like setup for sure. Like Tom is definitely going to find himself in this situation where he's one-on-one with somebody and has to make that decision. And I think he's going to find himself in that situation. I think he's not going to do it, and I think that's going to have been the right choice. In fact, I predict that the person he finds himself at odds with will be the trash can man, because the symmetry there is just too appealing.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We will see.
Oh, that's I like that. We'll see. So from here, we cut over to Harold, who is really enjoying his new life and all the sexcapades he's going on, Matt. But I love this line here. The doubt is starting to crawl into him, because it says, but if it was such a small thing, why did this room have that stale and slightly sour odor that he associated with the solitary pleasure of all his bad years? Oh yeah, why, Harold? Why? And it's so funny that the small thing he's thinking of here is, of course, sex, like vaginal sex, but also it's love, it's intimacy, it's everything that's missing from this thing that you're doing that you didn't think you actually needed. But it's just a small thing here.
I mean, it's interesting to think about like why keep that off limits, and it's basically just like, well, that's procreative sex, that's the life-giving sex. All the stuff they're doing is pleasurable, but it's not the thing that brings forth life, right? So it's like
Yeah.
that's the way, metaphorically, that's why it's off limits. Is it that might accidentally create some meaning accidentally, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's again, like it's the opposite. This is, chastity, that kind of thing is, typically reserved for the ultra pious religious type person, right? I mean, again, Mary being a virgin, right? This is very, very kind of integral to the Jesus creation story. And here it's being kind of turned on its head by the devil, or his facsimile here in Randall Flagg. Once again, we see a note here where Nadine is thinking about this stuff. She's thinking about all the things he's doing, like they're doing everything but, right? They're doing like everything but. And it's like the type of thing that you see in, like, I read this section and I thought of the Garfunkel and Oates song. I don't know if our listeners have heard of them, but it's called The Loophole, and it's basically a song about how if you want to honor Jesus, put it in my butt, and it's fine that way, because God, that's the hole that God can't see, which is, like, it's funny because it's actually a thing that actual, like, Christian people, like, did. And it was of course absurd. It's completely absurd, but it's just like this idea that Nadine is reflecting, common, I don't want to say Christian tropes, because that feels like a weird phrase to use, but yeah, kind of, right? But we're turning them upside down almost. We're not even turning the tropes upside down. We're just placing them on a different label.
Yeah. Well, it's basically like a comedic exaggeration of the idea of like, you have to be chaste for your husband, but you're gonna be chaste only in the absolute letter of the law. And in every other way. And not only that, but like, he's kind of magically watching through the window and possibly enjoying it. It's just so, like, perverse and creepy and great. I love it.
I love that she says it was enough to make you wonder what sort of man your fiance really was.
Yeah, Nadine, maybe also consider the crucifixions also.
Nope, it's just that he doesn't want me to have vaginal sex. That's it. I'm not worried about anything else. It's just this one little thing.
I'm starting to think Nadine's not a very good person.
So for Harold's part, he's realizing he hasn't spent much the last couple of days thinking, which is, the thing that a person who thinks they're like an erudite scholar should be doing, right? And he's realizing how ridiculous he's being. But then he says this, but that didn't change the fact that they had excluded him. Although Nadine had said little about her reasons for coming to him, Harold had an idea that she had been excluded in some way too. Rebuffed, turned back. They were a couple of outsiders, and outsiders hatch plots. It's perhaps the only thing that keeps them sane. Remember to put that in the ledger, Harold thought. He was almost downtown now. There was a whole company of outsiders on the other side of the mountains, and when there are enough outsiders together in one place, a mystic osmosis takes place, and you're inside where it's warm. Just a little thing being inside where it's warm, but really such a big thing. About the most important thing in the world. This is great because it reflects perfectly off of what Tom just said, right? The idea that Randall Flagg is an outsider and he's actually terrified of the inside. And so this idea that you're going to go to him and you're magically going to be inside, it's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's not the reality. It's not what's going to happen. You're deluding yourself. The only thing outsiders will get with Randall Flagg is more outside.
Yeah, in the same exact way that he's not getting any meaning or feeling of belonging from Nadine. It's going to be the appearance of belonging, because technically you're around other people, but it is actually this, as we saw the hints of, it's actually sort of this terrifying, panopticon police state actually that they've built, where it's going to be, it's going to be awful.
It's everything but warmth, right? Just a little, like, also we have to say the inside outside that we're doing legs with in this imagery is also perfect for Nadine's vagina, which is the place he's not allowed to go inside. Right.
Yes.
And so once again, like, this is he's deluding himself by thinking that he's going to be given access to something. He's going to be going inside, and no, you're going to get everything, but you're going to get the feeling of belonging. You're going to get the you're obviously going to be satisfied sexually, but it's not real. None of it's real, and he knows that, or he should know that.
He should. He thinks he's so goddamn smart, but yeah, it's debatable whether he kind of knows this and has lost the ability to change his choice because now he's kind of all in, or if he's just deluding himself completely. I don't know.
Yeah. Harold.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to our final chapter of the week, chapter 56. Our final chapter begins with Stu, after a long day of working at the power station, being informed by Ralph that there was another pregnant woman heading into Boulder. Only she had her babies out there on the road, and both of them, they were twins, they both died. And the doctor with them was not able to examine them before they were buried to determine if it was Captain Tripp's or not. But that introduces the possibility of Franny's worst nightmare. And it's extremely bad news for Franny and possibly for the species. And any predictions here, Matt? Any is humanity doomed here?
It's set up in a way where, from this story that's told here, we strongly suspect that the babies died of Captain Tripp's. But then later, it's interesting because later on, the doctor adds like a different shading on the story that makes it seem way more likely that these were just babies that were not healthy and they were never going to make it. But no, I think it's kind of, the story is intentionally keeping us off balance here, because this section by itself makes you feel like, well, there's no other explanation. They must have caught the super flu. So it's supposed to make us feel anxious. And as for, I think in the end, I don't think humanity is going to be doomed. I think that would be, this doesn't feel right to me for this story. Sure. So my prediction would be no, humanity's not doomed.
Okay. So Stu rushes home to make sure that Franny hears the news from him first, but stupid Sue Stern has already told her. Something happened to me when I was mad at Sue in this moment.
Uh-huh.
Like, I know she's a completely different person, but whenever I read Sue Stern, I just impose that with Sue Snell, who is the girl from Stephen King's Carrie. And I'm always just like, damn it, Sue, leave Carrie alone.
Why did you have to meddle, Sue? Again.
Is Sue close enough to Susanna and Susan that we should be worried about? Definitely. Sue Stern?
I mean, I thought Sue was like a short form of Susan, is it not?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, then yes.
I just don't know if the Susan rule counts Sue's as well.
I think it does, Scott.
Okay.
I'm worried.
So Franny, of course, is absolutely terrified, especially since she hasn't felt the baby move once since that one night, I think the night she first met Larry. We obviously find out by the end of this chapter that the baby is totally fine, and that's good. But man, I feel like any person that's ever been pregnant or been with someone that's pregnant remembers that particular anxiety of like, I haven't felt the baby move in a while. Oh no. It's just a thing that like we went through constantly of like, because I mean, there's all these rules, like especially when you're later in the pregnancy than Franny is, but like if you haven't felt the baby move in like 2 hours, you should start paying attention really closely to whether the baby's moved or not. It's pregnancy's scary. In conclusion, it's really scary.
Well, don't worry too much about it, Scott. I mean, the only reason my oldest daughter is alive is because her mom noticed when she stopped kicking and she had to have an emergency C-section.
Oh my God.
But, other than that, don't worry about it. Have fun out there, folks.
I remember you reminded me of that fact when my wife and I had just gone through a recent, like, anxiety-driven, like, oh no, the baby hasn't moved in a while thing. And I was like, great. Thanks for the help, Matt.
Well, I think I was literally just like, this is the kind of thing where I have to tell you this. I have to remind you of this.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Like, because it's impossible for me to brush that off ever again. It's like, no, It was I saw the cord around her neck when she came out with my own eyes. It's not a joke.
Yeah.
So
It's actually a great, like, it preps you really well for parenthood, because being anxious and worried about your child constantly is just half of what being a parent is, right? So it's great.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
So Franny, you're going to be a great mom, is what I'm saying. As long as your kid lives.
Yeah,
Just, small little detail.
Yeah.
Speaking of Franny, I do want to stop right here and just kind of step back and talk about Franny a little bit. How do you feel about her as a character in the book so far, Matt?
Yeah. There's a few things come to mind when you ask that question. So, I love Franny as a character. I love her psychology, the way that she is, the way that she behaves. I like her, I like her in the story. One thing I notice is that it doesn't really feel like she's been tested as much as some of our other characters.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's been put through hardship. She's been put through hardship. She lost her parents, but so did everybody else. she hasn't had like the extra level of like having to make hard choices. She hasn't had to make as many decisions as like Larry or Nick, for example.
Yeah.
She hasn't really had to make that many actions on her own that were sort of big character defining moments where she could have done this or that and she chose this. Like she seems to just always sort of make the right choice, but it's always kind of easy to make the right choice.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if we're building toward a part of the story where Franny will be asked to make some hard choices.
I think that's right. Not anything that's going to happen in the future. I'm not saying you're right with that, but I mean, just like your assessment of her, that's kind of the reason I asked this question, because I feel like Franny is a character that like came out the gate as one of my favorite characters in the book, where I was just like I love her introduction. I love everything King does very early on with who she is and those early struggles. I do think, especially in this free zone stuff, she's been pretty passive. And I think that is kind of hurting my view of her as a character right now, that I want to see her have a more active role in the events of the story. And like, her role in the free zone committee stuff has been normally to like stand up for what's right. But she always ends up like losing anyway, So like it just makes her feel like she's kind of just observing the events of the book in the last few hundred pages. And I want her to be more active. I want her to take a more active role in the stuff. So yeah, I mean, I don't, it's not that I dislike her as a character or anything. I've been noticing that, like, we've been talking a lot about Larry. We've been talking a lot about Harold and a lot about Nadine and the things that they're doing and the decisions that they're making. And we talk about Ralph and how he's changed. And even Nick with the struggles he's going through. I would say I could throw a similar complaint about Stu, though. Like he hasn't done much either.
Yeah. Both, it's interesting because both Stu and Franny struck me quickly as being characters with a lot of steel. They in the beginning of their stories, like Stu was particularly this guy who took quick, decisive action in shutting off the pumps. Like that was the first thing he did, right? And you get this impression of like, oh, this guy's very active, right? But then, and I want to be clear on what we're saying, right? Because like they were involved in a gunfight, and they acquitted themselves well, right? It wasn't like oh, they're just wallflowers. I think what we're saying is they haven't been faced up with like these real like sort of deep soul level like character defining like, what are you going to do, Franny? What are you going to do, Stu? I agree. I would say the same thing about Stu, actually. And I think in Franny's case, I actually kind of expect that whatever the kind of ending act of this book is, that's going to be where Franny's put in situations where it's not obvious what the right thing to do is, and it's gonna challenge her.
I think especially like with a character like Larry and characters like Harold and Nadine, I think their trajectory is pretty clear, because their arc is one of, you could go either way, and which way are you going to go? I think you're right that with a character like Stu and Franny, I don't think maybe I'm wrong in this, but I don't think it was ever in a doubt, like, are they going to join the side of evil? Like, that's not their arc. That's not the journey that those two characters are going on. And so their journey is much more, I don't want to say complicated, but it's just different. And it's less obvious at this point in the story. And so it feels like they're very static right now. Not to say that they're going to be that way forever, but.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I could be off base in saying that Franny's going to be faced with hard choices, because it could just be, I'm kind of reminded of Jack Sawyer in Black House, where it almost rose to the level of being a kind of complaint about the story, that he was just like this golden boy who always did everything right, and never really had to make like that sort of crux of the character choice, where it's like, that's the drama of the story. What's he going to do? Like, that's really not the kind of story that was. And I think maybe that's just not the kind of character that Franny is. And so maybe I'm.
Yeah. Well, I think Franny can have hard choices ahead of her that don't relate to whether she's going to go down a path of good or evil. They can be different kinds of hard choices, right?
True.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. So from here, though, we move on to, I think, one of my favorite scenes of the week, actually. A scene where Nadine returns home to collect some more stuff from her house and finds Joe sitting there. Importantly, not Leo, but Joe, right? He's fully kind of reverted back to the kid he was when we first met him. And it's this incredible scene where Joe just sits in a chair and says nothing the entire time. But it basically manifests as all of Nadine's guilt and self-doubt about the path she's chosen for himself. Like, I love this sentence right here, or this paragraph. Now his eyes seem to become faintly accusatory. They seem to suggest that it was also impolite to leave people on their own, and more impolite still to withdraw one's love from people who still needed and depended on it. Again, Joe is not saying or doing anything here. He's just looking at her. So Nadine is filling in all the meaning of all this stuff.
Yeah, it's projection of her own guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and also it does seem likely that the fact that she kind of abandoned him is causing some of his relapse.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think that's absolutely true, but he doesn't, he's saying it all with just looking at her, just being there. And like, this is one of those things where, like, did Nadine really have to go back to her house to get more stuff, or did she do this specifically to see Joe? I know she doesn't admit that to herself in this scene, right? But did she just go back to check on him and just didn't want to allow herself to believe that she needed to go back to check on him?
You can also, you can imagine her being like, well, now they'll feel bad that they drove me away, and like wanting to go spy and see how badly off everybody's doing now without you,
Yeah. It's really tragic, because I think, we've been mean to Nadine too, but I really do feel like she's another tragic character, right? Like, she understands the concept of empathy. She knows what she's doing is wrong, but she's doing it anyway, which I mean is bad and annoying, but also tragic.
Yeah, she understands the concept of empathy, but I see little evidence that she really feels it in a full way. Yeah, I mean, I think Nadine is worse than Harold. I'd say that.
That's a statement. I don't want to directly contradict you, because I have more knowledge than you do. But
okay,
no, well. I understand why you feel that way. But I don't know. Like, I wanted to kind of use this moment to bring our conversation back to this idea of fault and responsibility, right? Because in this moment, she says, and when I begged Larry, got down on my knees and begged him, he couldn't be bothered. He was too busy playing big man. So you see, none of this is my fault. None of it. Which is bullshit. And I feel like she knows it's bullshit, right? But again, this is something that we saw this from Lloyd the first time we met him, right? Or maybe not the first time we met him, but when he was stuck in the prison cell and decided that this was their fault, them, being this broad concept that is everyone but him, basically. We saw it again with Harold, who's saying, like, I am this way because of the way people treat me, like they're all inferior to me, this is them, not me. And then we see it again here with Nadine. So I really do think we're doing the idea taking responsibility, and I think that the perfect exact opposite of that is Mother Abigail, right, who has decided that taken it upon herself to go out into the wilderness to get right with God because she made a mistake, taking full responsibility of this mistake that she made. That, again, we're not exactly clear on what that mistake is, but that's okay. Like, she is taking responsibility to 11, right?
Yeah.
Saying, this is all my fault and I have to do something to right it, so I'm going to go do it. It's the exact opposite of this idea of putting the blame on someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. That is the central dichotomy of the story.
So from here, we move on to the next big group meeting. Everything the committee wanted to pass passes. Stu is now marshal or sheriff or whatever you want to call it. They've established a term limit of 1 year for the committee. A census is to be completed as often as possible. And then when they talk about having some sort of justice system, everyone, of course, wants to nominate the judge, who they've already secretly sent off to his death. Oops.
Whoopsie.
Guess they didn't think about that one. So they have to be like, oh yeah, I think he went to Denver for the day.
Yeah. Well, they leave everyone basically thinking either he like got waylaid on the way to Denver and he's dead, or he like defected on us, which like both of them are really demoralizing, actually, considering he was pretty popular.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like it didn't even occur to me either, as the reader, that like, a judge is a useful sort of person to have around. Like he could have been instrumental in helping them sort of construct their justice system. But I think, again, if we're gonna this refrain I keep bringing up today, like if we're taking the whole idea of like ultimate battle of good versus evil seriously, then maybe it's more important to have a really competent spy and agent than it is to have like a judge who can tell you how to have a courthouse,
Sure. It might be. Yeah, I mean, we know it's making him way happier. Like the thing that if they had not sent him and they had asked him to be judge, he would have done it, right? But would he have felt as fulfilled and important as he is feeling right now on his grand adventure?
I mean, it's almost funny, the idea that like you work your whole life as a judge, and then the world ends, and then like 3 months later, people are like, all right, good news, you're a judge again.
Yeah.
It's like, that's okay. That didn't seem like the most important job in the world, actually, for being honest, but okay.
Yeah. I get it. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah.
So as they walk back from the meeting, the committee discusses the next person they're sending off, and we get one of the most hilariously dated moments of this book, where Sue informs the group that Dana Jurgens is bisexual, and probably Sue herself is a lesbian or something in some way, and Stu just, well, he loses his mind a little bit, right? He acts probably like what a man born in the 40s or 50s, as Stu probably was, would probably react to this kind of news.
Yeah. Well, no, it's, as a Texan man born in the 40s or 50s particularly. Yes. I mean, he isn't like mad about it. He's just like gobsmacked. Like he's never believed. Maybe he's heard of such things, but he never believed that such a thing as a lesbian actually existed, or that he would run across one in his travels. Which I'm just gonna, I don't know exactly, what the age range of our listeners is, but like even like growing up in the 90s, I sort of felt like maybe there were like 15 or 20 gay people in America. Like you know what I mean? Like I don't know if you felt this, but like I just I had no idea, right, the prevalence, because it was such a taboo at the time.
Sure. I mean, one of our high school friends, my high school friends, was gay, and like he did not come out to us until college. I mean, we all knew, but like he didn't feel comfortable enough to come. So yeah, I mean, it was just a totally different world. And I mean, like it's just I mean, there's nothing like I don't know. I'm a straight person. I don't think there's anything offensive here. I think it's just kind of really funny how Stu is completely unable to understand what bisexual is, right? Like Susan says she's bi now, and Stu's response to that is bi now, BYENOW, which I don't know if the audiobook did that particular joke justice.
I think so. I mean, just the way he read it was just like bye now. Like obviously not the right,
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
It's just so great because then like he's saying goodbye to Dana Jurgens and Dana Jurgens like kisses him on the mouth and he's like lesbian. like there's no way this girl's a lesbian. And I just want to be like, yeah, Stu, we already covered that. She's bi. We've done this.
It's great.
It's delightful. Like it's one of those things that like I don't know, perhaps the LGBTQ listeners like were offended by this. I think it's just silly fun that
Sure.
this Texas boy just like has no idea what any of this means. And yeah, like you said, it's not like he's angry about it. It's not like I don't think there's any kind of maliciousness in any of this. He's just kind of gobsmacked.
Well, the fun is being poked at Stu, right?
Yes, yeah, he's the butt of the joke. Yeah, for being unable to understand this at all. Yeah, the book is non-judgmental at all on any of that stuff. Yeah. So on her way back from saying goodbye to Dana, Sue finds a puppy hidden in a pipe and brings it home. This is not only good news because puppies rule, but also because it makes 2 dogs in the zone, which might indicate, hope for survival of that particular species. So, that's good.
Yeah, that's cool. I was how long how much time has passed since the Captain Trips was released?
It is late August at this point, and Captain Trips was June.
Yeah, okay, that's not too much time because I was thinking when you say puppy, I'm like, how long do dogs stay puppies? And
they said it was 6 month old, and
6 month old. Okay, so it was born before yeah,
and puppy is like a year.
Yeah, I couldn't do that math because I just didn't remember those numbers. But okay, so definitely born before that.
Yeah,
and
but it
then
survived.
Yeah. So we'll just see if it's we'll see what happens.
Make more doggies.
I mean, what's the point of humanity if the dog kind doesn't exist?
Is 2 dogs? I don't know how this works with dogs because, like in humans, right? You need more than 2 humans to maintain a population, right? But like, in dogs, is that enough? What I don't know.
I would think it's probably not. I think you probably need genetic diversity to avoid some bad outcomes.
Yeah, but is that number like I forget what like the magic number is in people.
Well, yeah, I don't know how they calculate these things honestly, but it could be that they'll just keep running across dogs out in the wild. I think dogs are probably pretty good at finding each other.
Sure,
but I don't know, man. It's a good question. I didn't
probably not necessary to think about. I mean, the point is it provides hope, and I wonder if we can maybe read into some of this. Like Sue sends Dana out to. I mean, again, Dana is the one we get definitive, future information on, right? Like because no one in the zone ever saw Dana Jurgens again, is what we're told. So again, it's not that she dies, but she never comes home, basically. And but she sends Dana to her possible death, and then she's rewarded with a puppy. So is that like the white, you did good, kid, here's a puppy? Is there something to read into that there?
I mean, it does seem like there's something like a 3-beat happening here where we send our 3 spies off and it feels like, we get this moment of like this feeling of rightness with the judge. We get this feeling of rightness that she finds a puppy. I don't remember any matching moment coming with sending Tom away. I don't remember a moment like that happening.
No, it's just Nick kind of sitting outside with his hands in his pocket, sad, the whole time,
being sad.
Yeah.
Well, so it's not really a 3-beat, but there are 3 of them. So I was trying to put something together there.
I understand. Yeah. Speaking of that section, though, from here we do move to Tom's goodbye, and I'm really fascinated by this because here's the opening sentence of the Tom leaving section. August 27, nearly dusk, Venus shining against the sky. That sounds so out of place with the rest of the book, to the point where like you'd think we were in another epistolary section, like this is someone's diary or meeting minutes or something, but we're not. This is just the narrator of the book going August 27th, nearly dusk, Venus shining against the sky. It feels so different. And I think it's for a reason. I think it's really fitting because our characters are about to send Tom to what is almost surely certain doom. And I think it is very intentional that King, right before the Tom section, puts this note about Dana Jurgens and how she's never coming back. We'll never see her again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost as if the book really wants to mark this moment. It wants you to know and feel the importance of this moment. And so it does by kind of marking it in history. August 27th, nearly dusk, Venus shining against the sky. That little detail, what does that matter? What does that matter to what's happening here? Well, we're marking time. We're marking the moment. Remember this. Remember this moment when we did this thing where we sent this guy. This is when we sent Tom Cullen to his death, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like a sort of section break, or at least it's like you're going to index future events based on their reference to this moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, there could be a very practical purpose to it, which is just like you've got some characters going off in one direction and these characters staying here, and you want to, and you might have time passing at different rates, and so it can be convenient to call back to a particular moment, mm-hmm. If the timeline isn't synced up. Yeah. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's just a possibility.
Well, I mean, we are seeing like how much by the end of this, we kind of see that dates are suddenly mattering because we know the next committee meeting is September 2nd. Mm-hmm. And we know Harold has a bomb. And so now we get to kind of count down to that day, like we got to count down to at the beginning of the book. I think they said July 4th was like the big day in the Captain Trips timeline. And we were kind of slowly counting down to that. And now we're doing it again with September. So I mean, maybe it is just to set us in time a little bit, but it feels different.
Yeah, I agree.
So Franny goes to the new doctor in town to get her baby checked out. And we happily learn that the baby is completely healthy and totally fine. And there's nothing more to worry about. We also learn in the same a little subsection here that the population of the zone has swelled to over 1,000 residents now. It's 1,000 people living in town. So everything's going great, Matt. Everything's good. Everything's fine. Everyone's healthy. We're doing good. Nothing bad's gonna happen.
Yeah, no, it seems like everything's heading in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Just imagine being like a normal citizen of the the free zone and just being just actually feeling that way. Like, wow, it's really amazing how people are coming together. This is great, and just having no awareness of like these dark undertones of these. I mean, that's going to be almost everybody's experience in the town. Mm-hmm. is like everything's great. Everything's
Yeah.
Well, yeah, probably not though. I enjoyed the baby checkup scene because it was like a perfect depiction of a pregnant woman talking to a doctor, because it's got the doctor attitude down pat, where Franny's like, I felt the baby move, and the doctor's like, it's too early, you didn't, it was probably gas. And she's like, it was definitely the baby, and he's like, yeah, fine, whatever, anyway. You know what I mean, Scott?
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah. It's almost always gas the first time. Like, yeah. And it is probably too early in the pregnancy for her to actually feel the baby. But we live in a magic world. It could be a magic baby. So it's definitely the baby.
Right. But the point is, the doctor knows better than to argue.
Yeah. You don't argue with that. Yeah, sure. You're right. You're totally right about everything. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So not everything is good, of course, Matt, because from here we cut back to our friends Harold and Nadine, who are down in the basement of Harold's house as he builds a bomb that he also has found a way to remote trigger thanks to a helpful book in the library. See, kids, this is why libraries are bad. This is why we ban books. This is why, here. Books are bad. We should ban them.
It's good that the Library of Alexandria burned down. There, I said it.
Bold stance. Pro Alexandria burning down. There we go.
I'm the only person in history who's ever said that. So
yeah. Harold also talks about how old dynamite sweats and how dangerous that could be. And this is when I know that the people that were making Lost just were reading The Stand, because dynamite sweating was a big plot point.
I was
Lost.
I forgot where I knew that fact from. It's totally Lost. Yes, You're right.
So there's an interesting part when they're talking about how sweating dynamite is very dangerous because it's nitroglycerin and it could go off at any moment. Nadine thinks this: surely if this was Flag's will, and the planchette had told her that Harold was Flag's way of taking care of the committee. The dynamite wouldn't be old, and even if it was old, it wouldn't explode until it was supposed to. Would it? Just how much control over events did Flag have? Enough, she told herself. He has enough. But she wasn't sure, and she was increasingly uneasy. Doubt. There's doubt, Matt. So yeah, I think we're kind of pushing back against the comment you made earlier, which is that maybe this isn't destiny. Maybe he doesn't have as much control as he's making characters think he has over things.
Maybe so. You know, I really liked or I noticed, I wanted to talk about the idea that like Harold just treats her like shit. Which is not something that I maybe would have predicted, right? Because like I could have seen it going a different way. Really, Harold becomes servile and passive around Nadine because he's like, oh, like I'll do anything to keep my access to the sex, because that's like all he cares about now. But like, no, he treats her like complete shit. This is like part of. I mean, I think really what it is like this is a continuing projection of his self-hatred and self-loathing for having made the choice that he made. It actually feels more honest to the character. It's just not something I would have thought of.
Yeah, I mean, I think Harold is not getting what he's not getting what he really needs, right? I mean, he's getting what he wanted, but he's not getting what he needs, and he's taking that out on her, that anger. I mean, I'm not. I don't want to. I wanted to say Harold hates women, which I think is. It's not that that's a false statement. I think it's too broad of a statement for this particular instance. I think he does not respect Nadine at all, and he doesn't respect her for the exact reason that he's with her, which is she's giving him the things that he wants. It's this whole complicated web of shittiness, and like he really does treat her like shit.
Yeah, it's great.
I do think, like, as we close out the chapter, we do see a lot of their kind of relationship from Nadine's perspective, which we hadn't seen too much so far. And the ways in which Nadine and Harold's sexual relationship is portrayed from each side, like from Harold's, it's very much, she's fulfilling his fantasies, and here, as the chapter closes, we are firmly in Nadine's point of view, and I think the doubt and uncertainty she has is reflecting the way she interacts with Harold. And I think like the grossness of Harold is really coming through here. Like I love this quote: his eyes were working her over in that greedy, crawling little boy's way that she had come to recognize. And then like he has her go up the stairs first so he can look at her butt from behind because she's not wearing any underwear. And it's just like from his point of view, it was like, oh my God, this older woman, and she's like, she's seducing me, Mrs. Robinson. And then this is just like gross. It's just gross and awful and uncomfortable. And like, of course, it always was gross and awful and uncomfortable, but getting to see it from Nadine's point of view just makes this all the more terrible.
One thing that's interesting to me about it is that my recollection is that the text is not like Harold is gross physically. Like she never actually comments on his physical appearance.
No, yeah.
It's literally just the grossness is the way he looks at her, the obvious sort of like greedy, sort of dirty-minded, emptiness that he's pursuing this with. That's what's gross about it.
Yeah, no, completely.
Yeah.
So then we end with Harold finishing the bomb, and we get told that the next committee meeting is on the 2nd of September. And so that's ominous. We leave on that ominous note, and we'll have to figure out what's going to happen.
Yeah, sure we will.
But that will have to be for another week, because that is it for us this week. We have completed these 3 chapters. Yeah, 3 chapters. And next week, we're going to be doing a few more. Next week, we're doing 4 chapters, Matt. We're doing chapters 57 through 60. We will complete book 2 of The Stand. That will be it for book 2. And then we will move on to we're in the home stretch. We're going to sprint to the finish line from here. So it's going to be exciting.
4 chapters. That's so many.
Yeah, but they're shorter. It's the same amount of pages. It's all relative.
I don't know how to handle this.
All right, but before we go for the week, it's time to read the answers to our discussion question from last week. Matt, what was that question last week?
Favorite dog?
Oh, it was a really tough, difficult question. And
y'all came through.
I will say, when I asked this question, I had like a list of dogs in the back of my head that people were definitely going to pick. And I was surprised at how little of those dogs were picked. I mean, there's a lot of dogs in books, so I shouldn't be that surprised. But a lot of the old standbys were not selected.
There's a lot of very niche dogs here.
Yeah.
Not the first dog you'd reach for.
No.
All right.
But
so
that's why these questions are great, because it's not our perspective, it's our listeners.
Exactly. That's the fun part for me too, as I get to learn about many, many dogs. So first, Irk Stabworthy says, there are so many good and noble dogs in fiction that I find it hard to choose. Radar from King's most recent fairy tale springs immediately to mind, probably because I just finished reading it. But I would have to say that Fry's dog, Seymour Asses, from the excellent Futurama episode Jurassic Bark, is the best good boy ever. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, run, don't walk, to the nearest TV and watch it now. Do it with a new friend or someone you really want to impress. Trust me, you won't regret it. So they're just being mean there, right? They're suggesting that because it's a bad idea to do that with any company at all, and not just by yourself with some
because
fishes.
You're gonna fucking weep.
Yeah,
that's why.
Yeah.
We're not gonna spoil that episode if you haven't seen it, but it is actually a really, really good episode of television.
Yeah.
Gaspode the Wonder Dog from Discworld series. What?
Spinagon says.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say. Spinagon says Gaspode. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I haven't read Discworld, so Gaspode. It could be Gaspode, but I think it's Gaspode. The Wonder Dog from Discworld series, a random mongrel dog that somehow accidentally gained the ability to talk, but almost no one notices that because dogs don't speak. It is a well-known fact. It is well-known at the organic level, like a lot of other well-known facts which overrule the observations of the senses. This is because if the people went around noticing everything that was going on all the time, no one would ever get anything done. Besides, almost all dogs don't talk. Ones that do are merely a statistical error and can therefore be ignored. I need to read more Discworld. It's so fun.
It's pretty delightful. Yeah, this is just the kind of thing where as soon as you read it, you're like distracted by imagining how this could go.
Yeah. Spinagon goes on to quote a bunch of more lines from Gaspode, the Wonder Dog, which are great.
If you're curious. Steve Living Room says, can't believe no one mentioned Einstein from Watchers by Dean Koontz. I love Einstein. Such a cool dog. Such a cool I think there was a typo. Such a cool dog and super smart. He made me laugh, cry, and get all up in my emotions. Just a great character.
I love when you Ron Burgundy the questions and just read them exactly. Suck a cool dog.
Suck a cool dog.
Suck a cool dog. Matt, 2022.
Yeah, that's it. That's the end.
I don't know Einstein from Watchers by Dean Koontz, but I know Einstein from Back to the Future, and that's a great dog.
That's where I thought this was going. See, I was thrown off. That's why I did that's why I screwed up.
Suck a cool dog. All right, next we have Bisexual Punch Party, who says not technically a dog, but the title does have to go to Oi, the Billy Bumbler. I did expect that answer, and I agree. Best dog.
Yes, he's clearly modeled on all of the good traits of dogs, right?
That's true, yeah.
Pear Jane says, my nomination goes to Sir Didymus, the brave and noble terrier knight from Labyrinth. Like all terriers, he is assured of his own strength and importance. He loudly and insistently challenges all potential foes who come across his path. He's loyal to his core and defends his found family at his own peril. When faced with sleeping palace guards or a giant robot gate, he yaps his challenge incessantly and only hushes when Sarah confirms that he is brave, noble, and essentially a very good boy. No odds are too great for him to overcome. He is a knight, and he is a terrier. He also rides a sheepdog named Ambrosius, so extra points.
It's been too long since I watched Labyrinth.
Yeah, me too. I don't remember some of these things. Yes.
Hey, speaking of terriers, do we, as a society, collectively, do we like Toto? Do we like Toto? Toto's like one of the most famous terriers ever, but are we pro Toto?
I don't remember what Toto actually gets up to, other than just being around. Doesn't he?
Toto is the one that pulls on the
The curtain.
The curtain, yeah.
I think I like Toto. I think I'm positively disposed toward Toto personally, but I'm interested to see what other people think.
Toto died at age 11 on September 1st, 1945.
Wow. Thanks for telling me that. So sad now.
He was buried at Spitz's Ranch in Studio City, Los Angeles. The grave was destroyed during the construction of the Ventura Freeway in 1958. Thanks, Wikipedia. So the answer to do we like Toto is no, because we destroyed his grave to build a freeway.
Yeah, that's like a perfect noir LA story, isn't it?
It is. I mean, that's literally the plot of LA Confidential, right? That they're building a freeway.
But you got to throw in that detail of they destroyed Toto's grave for this.
How dare they? But yeah, I remember Sir Didymus from Labyrinth. Great terrier. Better than Toto? You decide. Next, we have Rear Admiral Bottom, who says, remember when dogs would get their own straight-to-video adventures as professional athletes? Where's the gritty reboot of Air Bud? The best fictional dog is the robot Gurr and his suit disguise on the old Invader Zim show. Honorable mention to Dan and Ann, the dogs from Where the Red Fern Grows, and all the dogs lost to violent deaths in young adult coming-of-age fiction. I agree on Air Bud, but I'm going to shock you. The first Air Bud was not straight to video. That movie went in theaters. The movie where the dog played basketball was in a movie theater.
Yeah. The world used to be different. Did you ever watch Invader Zim, by the way?
I did, because Michael really, really liked it.
Yes.
So I watched it with him.
Yeah, I love Invader Zim. I love Gurr, the dog robot, the robot dog, whatever it is. Yeah.
I never watched all of Invader Zim, but then they came out with a movie last year.
Really?
And I watched that. What,
last
did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, there was an Invader Zim movie that came out last year.
Wow.
God, you're such a terrible fan.
I am.
How do I know more about you?
That show came out like 20 years ago.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they released a movie. Maybe it was 2 years ago, but it was very soon.
Wow.
Oh, Jesus, time has no meaning anymore. It was 2019.
We're going to find out that the movie is actually set to come out in 2 years, and it hasn't even been announced yet. This is just your time traveler knowledge leaking through again.
How was this 2019? Wow.
Yeah, last year, like you said.
That was pre-pandemic. That's why the pandemic fucked with everything.
Yeah. I'll grant you that. All right. Obi-Wan Martez says Doctor Who's robot dog K92. I never watched Doctor Who. We've talked about this before, so I can't comment. That's
a big blank spot in my pop culture knowledge. Never seen an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Hobo Demon says Alexander from Full Metal Alchemist was a very good boy who played nicely with his owner Nina and never abandoned her or left her alone. Their inseparability makes you feel the thing. That one emotion I'm blanking on the name of. What emotion? Horror at the realization of man's potential for cruelty when facing the adversary of obstacles to their ambition, and how willingly they can shed their ethics like a damp jacket when tempted by a potential shortcut. That's the feeling I'm thinking of. Homo homini lupus est, etc. That Alexander, though, he's a good boy. This is an anime, so I know nothing about it. There's a dog in it, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a dog in Full Metal Alchemist. I've only seen like one episode of Full Metal Alchemist.
I think we saw the same episode of Full Metal Alchemist, and I said, I'm good.
Was it because Michael made us watch it?
Yes. And I said, yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's sounds about right to me. All right, Felidao says, I've been watching Rings of Power, and the first good dog that occurs to me is Huan, the Hound of Valinor, which is, of course, not in the show, but it's in the backstory material. Mm-hmm. Huan plays a very central role in the story of Beren and Luthien, which is one of the great legends of First Age Middle-earth. Long story short, Huan is an enormous wolfhound born in the land of the Valar. He's a super loyal good boy, the size of a small horse who enjoys fetch, belly rubs, and slaying the shit out of werewolves, vampires, and other evil servants of the Dark Lord. For those who haven't read the Silmarillion but know who Sauron is from the films or the books, here's a fun incident to give you an idea of how badass Huan is. There was a prophecy that Huan would only die upon encountering the mightiest wolf that would ever walk the world, Sauron knew this prophecy and decided to fulfill it himself. He shapeshifted into the most terrible werewolf that had ever existed, went out to do battle with Huan, and lost. Sauron ended up having to surrender his fortress to Luthien, who was with Huan at the time, in order to buy his own escape. So
that's a good boy.
A boy stronger than Sauron. So, good shit. Love it.
Give that dog many pets, I think.
Yes, I agree.
Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says Ralph from The Muppet Show was awesome, and his I Hope That Something Better Comes Along performance in the Muppet movie was great, but I think I have to go with Eddie in Frasier. Eddie was the perfect comic foil for Frasier and often stole the scene by making a bad situation even more farcical, and I love how he was always just staring dryly at Frasier. Perfect. Since you mentioned liking stories from a dog perspective, I'm curious as to whether you've seen the French film Baxter. Far from being a loyal and noble dog, Baxter is a sociopathic bull terrier who finds most humans repulsive and eventually forms a bond with an equally disturbed boy who is fascinated with Nazis and murder. Very French and very disturbing. Definitely not my favorite dog character, but worth a watch. I have not seen that movie, no. It sounds fascinating, though.
I admit this may be other than like Cujo, which is sort of the story where the dog is simply rabid. I'm really fascinated by the idea of a dog that's just like a bad person,
Bad dog, just bad dog,
like a Harold Lauder dog.
No, that's great. I kind of want to watch this now, actually.
Yeah, that's very enticing.
Eddie and Frasier is also a great answer. I love that.
Cool.
Dog. Did you watched Frasier, right?
No, a few episodes here and there. Yeah,
I did a complete Frasier rewatch a couple of years ago, and I say a couple of years ago, it was probably more like 5 since time is all warped. Mm-hmm. But I watched all of Frasier again, and it's a wonderful show.
Great.
And yeah, Eddie, and yeah, it's so good.
See, I don't remember you talking about this, so it was probably like 10 years ago.
But... No, it was sooner than that. I was definitely married, but I did not have a child.
Okay. So somewhere in that range, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
They were going to do a reboot of Frasier, but they don't want to do it because Frasier's dad, played by John Mahoney, passed away. So
yeah,
they can't do the show without him.
Figures, yeah, makes sense. All right.
I think I watched it not long after John Mahoney passed away, and that was in February of 2018. So 4 years ago.
So not 10 years ago. Okay, no. I believe you. All right, last answer from Brett7921. I'm sure this is not what you asked for, but I have to say Barf from Spaceballs, the movie. Barf, I'm a Mog, half man, half dog. I'm my own best friend, John Candy at his best. You know what? I'm more than happy to allow Barf into the canon of good dogs. He's the dog Chewbacca alien guy. He's great. He's perfect.
How do you feel about Spaceballs?
I love Spaceballs.
I love Mel Brooks. I do not like Spaceballs. This might be heresy. I love Mel Brooks. I love Mel Brooks comedies. I just was never that into Spaceballs. I mean, it's fine. It's just so broad. It's just like, yes. It's so broad.
Well, it's very dumb is what it is.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is like kids love it. And I loved it when I was a kid. And now when I watch it, I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because it's so dumb, which is a kind of humor, but it's not like it's super clever, right? Now, I know what you mean. I think I just have a soft spot for it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was because I came to it a little bit later.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like, I don't know, like if there's a Mel Brooks, like when Mel Brooks passes away, and I'm like, I need to watch some Mel Brooks movies. Like, there's just like 20 other movies I'm gonna go to before Spaceballs.
I think my favorite gag is the sight gag of the spaceship that just keeps going and going and going. That's because it's like an aliens thing,
Sure. Yeah, I need to rewatch it and give it. But like I would rather watch Young Frankenstein 20 times before I watch Spaceballs.
Sure. No, I mean, it's got some classic bits, but I won't say I agree, but I can empathize.
Not that I'm saying you're wrong for liking it, Matt or Brett, but it's never been my thing.
Sure.
All right, that is it for last week's question, which means it's time for a new question. And I think this is going to be a little more challenging of one than best dog.
Yeah.
Matt, what is next week's question?
What fictional character do you think could use to be a little more self-righteous, and why?
I love this question. I think it's really fun, and I look forward to seeing what y'all come up with. Because self-righteousness, good actually.
Yeah. What character do you want to give that lecture to? That the judge gave.
Oh man, I can't wait to see what people come up with. This is gonna be good. This is gonna be so fun. I love this. Thank you everyone for participating in this. Still, we've asked 150 questions. Over the course of the show, and y'all are still bringing us great stuff, so we appreciate it.
And I feel like some of you have answered almost all of them.
Yeah, really have. All right, but that's going to do it for us here this week on the show. Next week, as I said, we'll be completing book 2 of The Stand. Once again, that will be chapters 57 all the way through chapter 60. 4 chapters, lots of stuff. It's gonna be a good one, Matt. It's gonna be. I can't say words because I won't spoil anything. But it's gonna be a good
episode.
It is, yeah.
And remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and of course over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
And if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it. Always is the time to do it. It's never a bad time to do it. You can find us basically everywhere. I should stop saying basically everywhere podcasts are, because I can't think of a place we're not. So everywhere podcasts are.
Yeah, we're even in places where we shouldn't be.
Wait, we are?
Oh,
where
yeah.
Are we?
Oh, I can't say.
What's an example? What's an example of a place that we shouldn't be, but that we definitely are?
Well, we're in those like scraper websites where they're like Bloom Blur, and it's like not a real thing, but they've like scraped your podcast from the internet, and then they're like hosting a link to it as if it's theirs, and if they have some right to it.
Are we getting credit for those downloads still?
I have no idea, Scott, but
I should look into that.
I doubt that many people are viewing the podcast through
probably not
Schmuggler or whatever. So
I mean, I have to believe. I guess maybe we're only getting one download because they're scraping it. And are they hosting it, or is it literally just pointing to our? We don't need to talk about this right now.
We can figure it out. Regardless, if you want to support us directly and not through schmuggler.com, then please consider going to patreon.com/doofmedia and supporting us there. Yes. Special thanks to new patrons this week: Liam Amsterdam, Matt H, and Morgan G. Welcome. We have cool, cute Stephen King. This is your fault for laughing. We have Stephen King adaptation podcast over there. Fresh Stephen King adaptation podcast.
I just got the image of you in a white van going, we have cool in the van, we got some cool Stephen King back here. Come on in the van.
It's true though.
You kids like Stephen King?
I saw an unmarked white van for sale on my street, and it even had like the cage part that separates the front seat from the back area. So you could like keep a prisoner back there. Just letting y'all know.
Yeah.
Didn't
kids like that fairy tale. Got some of that fairy tale in the back of the van.
got some Dean Koontz novels signed by Stephen King.
Of course, if you cannot afford to jump into the back of our van right now, that is absolutely okay. You can always help by sharing the van's location with all of your friends. We're going to go to jail. You can, of course, always help us by leaving a rating and a review on any of the podcasting platforms that allow those, except for the illegitimate ones that Matt was talking about. This week's Spotlight review comes from Jesse Jean, who gives us 5 stars and says, "The quartet, these are my people. I found myself listening for hours, and then the next day, and the day after that, book by book. This is the most in-depth podcast and honorable true tribute to his work. I can't give this enough stars. If you're as hooked on the tower as me, and especially if you have made many journeys, this is a comprehensive review and exploration of all his worlds." Well, thank you, Jesse. That was incredibly nice. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, wow. That's really quite heartwarming, actually. Thank you.